I was supposed to be an observer, part of a study, clinical, detached, controlled. We were testing something simple, the reliability of psychiatric diagnosis. Pseudo-patients entering institutions, reporting symptoms, tracking how quickly the system failed to distinguish sanity from illness. I volunteered. I told them about voices. Nothing violent, just echoes, like distant footsteps behind a closed door. They admitted me quickly, quieter than I expected, no clipboard, no questions. Just a locked room and silence. I took notes. I documented everything. I thought I was doing well, but the pages started disappearing. The nurses stopped calling me doctor, and I don't know how long I've been here. Sometimes I find files with my name, not as researcher, as something else. They said I was the doctor, but when I look at the files, I'm listed as patient 6. They called it a routine infiltration. I was briefed, signed the forms, memorized the script. The symptoms I had to fake were simple enough. Auditory hallucinations, nothing too dramatic. I practiced the phrase, a dull thud, like a heartbeat, behind my eyes. It sounded clinical, vague, believable. The intake nurse barely looked at me when I recited it. She wrote something down, asked if I felt safe, then moved on. There were no further questions. No one confirmed my identity. No paperwork to sign. Just a plastic bracelet, a cold cot, and a door that locked from the outside. I was in. The plan was clear. Observe everything, record the conditions, and remain detached. It was all about the system, how it failed to discern sanity from performance. My task was to disappear into the structure, become part of it, and return with insight. I started writing immediately. Names, routines, how the medication line worked, how staff avoided eye contact, how silence weighed differently here, like it had corners. I kept my journal folded in my waistband. I never left it unattended. But even so, by the third day, the entries I distinctly remembered writing were gone. Entire pages were missing. Ripped? No. Neatly removed, as if they'd never been there. At first, I thought it was the orderlies, some kind of hazing or a test. But then something stranger happened. A man in the rec room, rocking in place near the window, looked straight at me and said, "Welcome back, Doctor." I froze. I'd never spoken to him. I hadn't told anyone I was a doctor or anything at all about the project. I was careful, always careful. "Do I know you?" I asked. He smiled. "You always say that part." I made a note about it, wrote it down immediately, even circled it. But the next time I opened my notebook, it wasn't there, and my pen was dry. A different one than I brought in. That night I dreamt I was walking the halls, not as a patient, but as staff. Clipboard in hand, keys in my pocket. The others looked away when I passed. I woke up gasping, the sound of the thud behind my eyes louder than ever. I tried to re-establish contact with the outside. I asked to use a phone. They said the phone was under maintenance. For days, then weeks. Eventually, I stopped asking. I began to notice the way the staff moved around me, always a step too slow, watching from the corners, as if waiting for something to happen. One nurse, tall with tired eyes, never called me by name. She only said, "You're up," when it was time to line up for meds. I refused them, as instructed. They logged my refusal without blinking, as if it had happened before. The routines blurred together. Meals, quiet hours, evaluations. During one of those evaluations, I mentioned the hallucinations had stopped, that I was ready to leave. The nurse didn't respond. She simply asked, "Do you remember how long you've been here?" I said, 7 days. She looked at me, paused, then scribbled something down, but I never saw that report. That night I searched for my original intake documents. There were none in the filing cabinet, just a list, first names only. I scanned through it. My name wasn't there. Later, lying in bed, I heard two nurses whispering in the hallway outside my door. One of them laughed under her breath. I couldn't hear the first part, but the second part was clear, crystal clear. He used to write that down. Not anymore. And then their footsteps moved on. I kept telling myself this was part of the process. Delays were expected. Disconnection was normal. But after more than a week without contact, my certainty started to fracture. I tried calling my university liaison again, Dr. Merrill. She had been my anchor, the one who handled the external documentation. Her number went straight to a disconnected tone. I tried the psychology department switchboard, then the main university number. No one picked up, no records, no receptionists, no voicemail, just dead air and silence. The phone I was using looked strange too, older than I remembered. Analog, discolored buttons with worn-out digits. I don't recall it being that way the first day. I brought this up to one of the staff members during breakfast, a man I hadn't seen before, wearing the beige uniform of administration. I need to confirm a check-in date. I believe there's been a communication error, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. He looked at me as if I'd said something funny. You're still saying that? Saying what? That you just got here. His tone was even, not unkind, but it cut deeper than if he'd shouted. He walked away without another word. Later I asked a nurse for a calendar. She gave me one, but the year printed at the top was wrong, 1 year too early. I laughed and told her. She didn't correct it, just walked away. That's when I started walking the halls more carefully, paying attention to details, trying to anchor myself. The layout seemed larger than I recalled. Corridors I hadn't noticed before, entire wings I could have sworn weren't part of the tour. Some sealed off with heavy doors, others echoing with laughter, or something like it. In a hallway near the visitation room, I found a photograph framed in glass. Dust had gathered along the edges. It showed a group of patients seated in a row of folding chairs, sunlight pouring in through barred windows. One man in the back caught my eye. He looked familiar. Same frame, same hairline, same small scar above the left eyebrow, same eyes. I leaned closer, the glass smudging with my breath. It wasn't just a resemblance, it was me. I stepped back, told myself it was a trick of the light, a glitch in recognition, a patient who happened to look like me, a fluke coincidence. But the unease nested under my ribs and stayed there. Back in the ward, I went searching through the filing cabinets again. I'd already checked them once and found nothing. This time, I looked deeper behind the tabs, beneath the forms. In the second drawer, tucked behind a pile of disorganized notes, was a folder marked with a single number, 6. I opened it. Inside were observation forms, behavior assessments, medical intake logs, and a photo. The same photo. Me, seated in the back row, just like in the hallway image. My face circled in red marker. Beneath it, a label typed in uneven letters. Patient 6, infiltration delusion, monitors own behavior obsessively. I dropped the file. It made a soft thud against the floor. That same dull thud I used to describe as the fake symptom, except now it felt real, echoing through my bones. I picked up the file again, hands shaking, eyes searching for a date, a signature, anything that could disprove what I was seeing. But the paper felt old, yellowed, touched too many times. The ink faded in places like it had been reviewed again and again. There were notes in the margins, handwritten. The handwriting looked familiar. I turned the page over. The next entry read, "Subject remains convinced of research role, shows high levels of self-monitoring, admits to hallucinations, refuses medication." My mouth went dry. I tried to laugh, to remind myself it was part of the test. The system was flawed. This was the point, to reveal how easily sanity could be mistaken for illness. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, that maybe this wasn't their test anymore. Maybe it was mine. I began recording my own voice. I had to. I needed some tether, some way to mark the difference between what I'd said and what I only imagined. I spoke into the cheap recorder I'd found in a drawer near the common area. It was old but functional. Each night, I documented everything. What I observed, what I felt, the gaps between. But the first time I played one back, it wasn't me. It sounded like me, the cadence, the hesitation, but the words, those weren't mine. The voice described a patient named Six, said he was cooperative but confused, prone to writing the same sentence repeatedly, said he responded well to visual prompts, said he often spoke as if narrating someone else's life. I checked the date on the recording. It was from 3 days before I'd even found the device. Later that day, I went to the isolation wing. It wasn't on the map I'd memorized before entering the facility, but I found it anyway, down a corridor that shouldn't have existed. The doors there were thicker, windows smaller. It was always cold. One of the rooms had its lights on. Inside, a man stood still, just beyond the glass. When I stepped closer, he stepped forward too. When I raised my hand, he raised his. Same angle, same delay. He looked like me, but the lighting, the reflection, something was off. I waved. He waved. I tilted my head. He mirrored it, not like an echo, but like a rehearsal. I turned quickly to the side and he did too, instantly, as if he knew what I'd do before I did. I stared, trying to catch any lag, any imperfection. And then he smiled. But I hadn't. I left. Fast. Back in my room, I began to write. Everything. Every detail I could remember. I documented the angle of the corridor, the temperature, the texture of the door, the exact phrasing of the recording. I filled 3 pages in one sitting. Then I turned back to the first page and saw it already written, my own handwriting. The same words, word for word. I flipped the pages in panic. Every line I'd just written was already there. Some of them circled, underlined, dated. I checked the back. Some were smudged like they'd been written weeks ago. I couldn't have copied them. I hadn't read them before. And then I noticed the pen in my hand wasn't the one I'd been using earlier. The ink was darker, finer. My original pen lay under the bed, out of reach, cap missing, empty. I walked the halls like a ghost after that. Staff greeted me with faint nods. A few patients smiled too long. The walls felt closer than before, as if the building itself had shifted in my absence. I passed a nurse's station I hadn't noticed before. It was unattended. I stepped behind the desk. Drawers, mostly empty, except one, locked. I used a fork from my dinner tray to pry it open. Inside was a thick, leather-bound journal. The label on the front read, "Observer Notes, Doctor see my name." It shook in my hands. I opened the first page. The handwriting was mine. The first line read, "I no longer remember who's watching who." I flipped forward, pages and pages of notes. My voice in written form. Descriptions of events I hadn't experienced yet. Or had. I couldn't tell. I read entries describing the isolation wing visit, the man in the glass, the matching gestures, the smile. Word for word, some pages had annotations, markings in red. "Repeat loop," they said. "Phase 3, integration onset." The last entry was short. "If he reads this, the loop resets." I dropped the book. The hallway outside was silent, and I realized something awful. None of the mirrors here had reflections that moved exactly like mine. Some of them were a few seconds behind, and some weren't mirrors at all. I couldn't stop thinking about the journal. The entries were too detailed, too precise to be fabrications, yet I had no memory of writing them. Each word felt like mine, but filtered through some invisible editor, erasing the moment of origin. I needed confirmation, something objective, institutional. I needed my file. It wasn't easy. Most cabinets were locked or empty. But in the administrative wing, beyond the evaluation rooms, I found a low drawer marked with patient numbers, slips of paper tucked in alphabetical order, some handwritten, some typed. One file was labeled with my full name, not just a number. I opened it. At first, it seemed like a normal case report, observational notes, behavior summaries, cognitive assessments. But then I saw the title page, Status. Doctor that brought a flicker of relief, but it was short-lived. Beneath it, Diagnosis, Delusional Identity Disorder. Treatment Plan, Continued Immersion Recommended. Do not interrupt behavioral narrative unless safety is compromised. What was this? The notes conflicted. Some referred to Dr. My Name in the third person. Others called me Subject 6. One described me as valuable for longitudinal tracking. Another read in red ink, still believes this is a study. Reintroduction successful. I flipped to the back of the folder. There was a consent form. My signature was there. It looked like mine, but I didn't remember signing it. I confronted the first staff member I could find, a tall orderly with grey temples and a clipboard in his hand. He didn't flinch as I slammed the file onto the desk. "Is this a joke?" I asked. "Am I a doctor or a patient?" He looked down at the folder, then back at me. "We let you believe what you need to feel safe," he said calmly. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. I stared at him, waiting for some hint of discomfort. But his expression never changed. It was like he was watching a performance he'd already seen. I left the file there. My hands were shaking too much to hold it. I needed out. The layout of the facility had changed again. Hallways where I remembered rooms, doors where there had been blank walls. The emergency exit at the north wing was now behind a keypad I couldn't access. The numbers were worn smooth. I pressed random combinations until a siren chirped, then died. I tried a stairwell, only to find that it looped back to the same hallway I'd just left. Every route turned inward. At some point, I entered what looked like a therapy suite. Soft lighting, 2 chairs, white noise buzzing in the walls. I turned to leave, but the door clicked behind me. Locked. I jiggled the handle, knocked, shouted. Nothing. Across the room, a mirror took up most of the wall. I sat. It was supposed to be a one-way mirror, standard in these types of institutions, but something about it felt wrong. I studied the reflection, my reflection. At first it was normal, same face, same clothes, same posture, but then I noticed something subtle. When I blinked, it didn't, not immediately, just a delay, half a second. I blinked again. The reflection stayed still, eyes wide, then blinked late. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I raised my hands slowly, fingers trembling. The reflection followed, but out of rhythm, as if responding, not mirroring. I leaned forward. So did it. But a second too slow. I reached out and touched the glass. It didn't. Its hand hovered just short of meeting mine, and then it smiled, a smile that didn't come from my face. I stepped back, heart pounding, the sound of blood in my ears louder than the white noise. The light above flickered once. In the mirror, it didn't. I pressed my back against the door, suddenly aware of how quiet everything had become. There was no clock in the room, no ticking, no hum from the vents. Just me. And whatever that was on the other side of the glass, or the same side. I went to the nurse's station again, fists clenched, voice low but shaking. "I'm done," I said. "I've completed the observation phase. I need to be discharged." The nurse barely looked up. Her fingers danced across a keyboard I couldn't see. "Discharge requires approval from your attending physician." "And who is that?" She turned the screen toward me. "Attending physician, Dr. So, my name." I stared at it. My own name printed in bold beside a photo of my face. "That's me," I said. "I'm him." She tilted her head. "Then you should understand why it takes time." The room felt colder. I left without another word. In the hallway, patients wandered like shadows, some muttering, some silent. One was counting his fingers over and over, whispering numbers that didn't make sense. I returned to my room and tore through the drawers again. If this was a simulation, there had to be a break in the script, something I hadn't noticed. Behind the radiator, I found a binder jammed into the wall. Mold on the spine. I cracked it open, typed pages, medical directives, behavioral algorithms. A title on the first page, Rosenhan Protocol, version 2. I stopped breathing for a moment. The Rosenhan Experiment, the one I had studied, the one I'd modeled this entire infiltration on. A study from the 1970s, where healthy individuals posed as patients in psychiatric hospitals and were never recognized as sane. But this wasn't about diagnosis. This was something else. The subtitle read, Experimental Conditioning of Delusional Self-Role Assignment in Former Academic Personnel. The pages described a program designed to select individuals who had studied the Rosenhan experiment extensively, people with deep familiarity, researchers, analysts. Then it inserted them, not just as observers, as test subjects. The logic was coldly clinical. Delusion sustained by belief in purpose. Erosion of self begins with over-identification. A single phrase kept repeating in the margins. The observer is the observed. I flipped to the appendix, a list of names. First initials, last names, institutions, dates, all marked the same way, reclassified. I scanned down. There it was, my name, no code, no number, just a line beneath it. Final stage, acceptance. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw reflections blinking late. I heard voices from the intercom whispering phrases I hadn't spoken. I felt the pages in my hands even after dropping them. In the morning, I tried again. I returned to the discharge office, demanding to see the administrator. The woman behind the desk smiled too wide. We've contacted your attending. He'll see you shortly. She handed me a clipboard. It was a patient file. Mine. The diagnosis section had been updated. Subject has ceased to differentiate between patient and staff roles. Compliance achieved through internal recursion. I dropped it. Ran. Down the corridor, past the rec room, through the fire doors I'd once believed were exits. I found myself in the evaluation wing again. It looped like a maze. When I stopped to catch my breath, I realized I was standing in front of the mirrored therapy room again, but this time it was already open, no lock. I stepped inside, slowly. The chair was warm. The lights flickered. Once, then again. The mirror stared back, empty. No one on the other side. Just my own face, pale and flickering, as if the fluorescent hum was coming from inside me. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, the lights were off. Darkness swallowed the corners of the room, and then a click, an intercom. The same voice I'd heard in recordings before, only now it spoke directly to me. Begin observation. Patient is ready. And I understood. They hadn't been studying the institution. They had been studying belief, and I had given them all of mine. I found it inside a sealed envelope. It was tucked beneath the mattress of a bed I didn't remember sleeping in a room I didn't remember being moved to. There was no label on the envelope, just my name typed neatly across the fold. The paper inside was brittle. A pale ivory sheet, single-spaced, dated 3 months before I arrived. Except the date was also the same as my intake form. At the bottom, in clean black ink, was my signature. The content of the letter was worse than the signature. It was a formal confession, a written agreement to participate in an experimental immersion program designed to test the thresholds of psychiatric self-identification. It described the use of deception, erasure, conditioning. A line halfway down struck like a blade. I acknowledge full awareness that long-term immersion may compromise memory, perception, and personal identity. There was a second line beneath it. I waive the right to terminate this agreement unilaterally. I had signed it. But I didn't remember writing any of it. When I showed the document to a nurse, she nodded softly, as if this was something we'd gone over many times before. She didn't even read it. "You never really left," she said. "Not since the first loop." I tried to argue, to reason, but it felt like yelling underwater. The more I insisted, the calmer everyone else became. Later, in the cafeteria, a patient tapped my shoulder and smiled like an old friend. "You're the one who watches, right?" he asked. "I'm not a staff member," I replied reflexively. He laughed. "You always say that." The phrase repeated in my head like static. "You always say that." I walked out. There was only one place left to check: the surveillance room. I hadn't dared go there before. I think I was afraid of what I'd see, but now I needed something real, even if it shattered me. I passed through an unlocked hallway marked "Staff Only" and found a small, dim-lit room with 6 monitors. They flickered in and out, each one showing a different angle of the facility: common areas, observation rooms, therapy wings, and in 3 of them I saw myself. Not once, not like a reflection, not like a delay. 3 angles, same time. In one, I was sitting in a chair, jotting notes. In another, I was standing behind glass, watching 2 patients speak. In the last, I was walking down the same hallway I had just passed through. I looked to the door behind me. Empty. I turned back to the monitors. The angles had shifted again. I was everywhere, but also nowhere I could touch. I ran, down stairs that led nowhere, through doors that led back to their origins. Hallways collapsed into one another, rooms turned to mirrors, names blurred, faces repeated, until I reached a room I didn't recognize, or maybe I did. It had no number, no furniture, just a single recorder on a table. Old, cassette-based. I sat down and hit record. The sound of the tape spooling was the only thing that felt honest. I leaned in. My voice cracked when I spoke. "I don't know who I am anymore. I thought I was a doctor. I thought I came here to observe, to test the system, but maybe I was never outside it." My breath caught in my throat. I found a document, my own writing, a signature I can't deny. Maybe I volunteered for this. Maybe I was the first one in. I stared at the recorder, at the blinking red light. Or maybe I'm the last. I paused. I've seen others disappear. Names get erased, staff become patients, patients become observers. Everything loops, the halls, the thoughts, the roles. I lowered my voice. "If you're hearing this, maybe I was the last doctor." Silence. Then softer still, "or the first patient." I write the same sentence again, and again. The pen drags over the same groove, deepening it as if repetition will force the truth to rise. But every word I write contradicts the one before. I don't know if I was assigned here, admitted here, or if I simply never left. The walls hum, the mirror breathes. On the other side of the glass, someone watches. They never speak, but I can hear the scratching of their pen as they take notes. My notes? Their notes. I've lost track of whose observation this is. Then the door opens. A new subject steps into the ward. Young, sure of himself, clipboard tight to his chest like armor. I watch him from my chair, expressionless. I think I smiled once, just like he does now. The cycle begins again. The final whisper escapes my lips, barely audible. "And if you're listening to this, maybe you already signed too."